From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast.
Next tonight, we'd like to bring to the podium my father, Charles Walters, who founded Acres USA about 35 years ago. He's written dozens of books and thousands of articles and conducted more interviews than we can count with farmers and consultants, scientists all over the world. And early on, he said, well, we just need to air these ideas, sort of raise them up the flagpole and see if anyone salutes. And by the crowd here, we see a lot of people are saluting. So he's going to come to us tonight, sort of welcome you to the conference and give his point of view on the state of ecological agriculture, why we're here, the view from the country, and since we're in Minnesota, the news from Lake Wobegon. Please welcome Charles Walters.
Thank you, Fred. I'm very, very surprised to be here because I came by air. Now, my shoes somehow triggered the system and were found to be suspect. And I had taken precautions. I took the staple out of my ticket. I wore shoes without eyes, so they were slip-ons. Divested myself of my keys, my money clip, and substituted a rubber band. And I thought I was going to sail through the system. And then I look over, and there's this lady with her arms outstretched in a crucifixion pose. A wand is going up and down her arms, and gingerly examining what type of bra she had on. And I noticed it was my wife. We put ourselves together, and I noticed, I've talked to a few people around this conference, and they all tell me the same thing, or a lot of them have told me that I took a train from California, including a 4-hour bus ride, to not have to fly. Another lady from Ohio told me she drove her car for God knows how many miles to not have to set foot on an airplane. And quite frankly, that was my wish. But other people intervened, and it was faster to fly. But I just as soon walk. I sure appreciate all the presents after 35 years at this conference. How many of them are brand new, never been here before? Quite a few. I had to ask that question because I've had several people want me to say something I've said here before. So as I go on, I may do that. But for now, I get together with my son every once in a while to try to figure out systems for making things flow smoother. And one of the things we have trouble with is communication. And I've often wondered what would happen if we had punctuation when we talk. For instance, if I get to the end of a sentence, I should have a period. Or if it's a quote mark, it would be or if I need an exclamation mark, it would be or a dash. So I thought I'd try that out, and we thought we might plug that in later on. But do you have a book over there, somebody? And do you have a book I could borrow? Let me just illustrate the point here. Go to page 1120. Here we go. This is about Don Quixote, apparently. Don Quixote's been looking for his Dulcinea and he comes to this end. So it goes like this. Don Quixote opened the door and entered the inn. He sat down at the plank table, slammed his fist on the floor. I forgot to tell you about the comma, didn't I? And said, quote, "Ho, varlet, a bit of larded lubricant for the staff of life." The innkeeper came to his side, standing to his full height. Out. Don Quixote arose. He left out the front door. I left out a period there. Don Quixote arose. He left out the front door. And the last sound was that of his departing horse. I don't know whether you want to adopt that system or not, Fred, for this conference. Somehow I think it kind of lays an egg. You know, when I started Acres U.S.A., there were about 300 farm magazines in the United States. Some were newsletters, some were slick magazines, beautiful typographic work, brilliant in their presentation as they were lacking in their substance. And so the question was, what could I possibly say that is not being covered by these 300 different media serving agriculture? And after examining many, many of them, I wondered whether we were operating on the same planet. These magazines were troubled to the point of ignoring sound technology and sound economics. And because they ignored it, farmers were seldom told the way it was. And I capsulized that for myself by remembering an old poem, a 13th century poem by Tommaso Campanella. Behold, most wonderful, they gave themselves death and wars for pence stole out by kings from their own stores. And if someone rose so this truth be given, it kills him unforgiven. I think sometimes that Alexander Pope had a better poem to describe our lot in life. He looked at the political forums of his day and he wrote, "The blind man dances, the cripple sings, the sot a hero, the lunatic a king, but hope springs eternal in the human breast. Man never is, but always to be blessed." This is our lot. Hope springs eternal. I had a conversation the other day with George Siemens. George is the CEO of Organic Valley up in Wisconsin. He started out with not much more to pull himself up with than his own bootstraps. But that organic operation is now doing very close to $3 million a year. He has achieved the one thing that back in the old NFO days we only dreamed about. Not that he has mastered collective bargaining, which he has, but we often wondered what would happen if we could make an organization so valuable that people would, instead of being recruited by teams going down the road, would stand in line in order to get in. This is his situation today. People are standing in line to market their milk. Farmers who wouldn't talk to me about organics 10 years ago now want to get in because here's a man that showed them how he could collect the full tariff for a gallon of milk. I am told by Gerald Fry and some of his associates that a new breed is being formed. It's made up of the Devon, and it's going to be called herbivores. Herbs meaning grass eating, and taurus, of course, is the generic name for cattle. The operation is now in the same posture that Mr. Siemens is up in Wisconsin. People are making application to get into the system. This is the future of the organic business in the United States. We are able, because it is being consumer-driven for the first time in the last 34 years, it is going to go up from here on. So there's no use talking about survival any longer. As a matter of fact, survival is not a fit objective for people in this audience or this movement. Our objective should be to prevail, and prevail we will, because people are going to start, farmers are going to start making application to get into organics in a meaningful way, rather than dragging their heels and sending the people who were selling the idea of organics packing. Oh, we still have plenty of obstacles. Don't make any mistake about that. The press still refers to cow pen operators as cattlemen. Alan Greenspan applauds concentration in agriculture the way he applauds Walmart taking over retailing. But we know that every equation has to have two sides, and there's an equal in between them. In order to have the sales, you have to have the buyers. In order to earn the money, you have to have someone who earns money that can spend it. Economically speaking, Landy Cook and I have computed that the shortage denied agriculture between 1950 and 2002 is very close to putting an increase in the public and private debt on the other side of the equal sign. That's the broad spectrum economic picture. All the cattle, 80% of the cattle are still being birthed on family farms with people that have herds of 20, 25 or less. And yet cattle and red meat production is the most concentrated of anything in the American economy. No more than 3 people control the feedlot system of the United States. You know what's happened to hog production. 40% of the farmers went out of hog production during the first 2 years of the big drive by Smithfield and the other people to put hog production in concentrated feeding. We know that cattle in the feedlot require 25 cubic feet of air a minute, and they can't get it. All they get is a lungful of fecal dust and pesticides. The cows, the dairy cows in concentrated feeding too often end up with parotid or Johne's disease. And Johne's disease, if it's carried by the cow, is very apt to go right past the pasteurization temperature. We have a country full of kids that are lactose intolerant. And yet the day that they're taken off of grocery store milk, and put on fresh milk with cream on top, they are no longer lactose intolerant. How is this that we have such fictions running around the country that it's destroying the health of the American people? We have 300 chemicals out there that have been identified as inimical to the health of human beings in, around, and on the food supply. And those chemicals, those 300 farm magazines I'm talking about, they haven't even made a sound about eliminating them. We talk about it constantly. Those chemicals, plus the others in our industrial society, have constructed a civilization in which 1 out of every 3, and according to the Centers for Disease Control, 1 out of every 2.18 are destined to hear the prognosis or the terrible word cancer. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a disgrace to a civilized society and a monument to the stupidity of man. We've seen our chickens. The very first issue of Acres U.S.A. had a big picture on the front. Chicken cancer hits 90%. 90% of the American flock 35 years ago was infected with avian leukosis virus. I'm sorry to tell you that figure has now been raised to 100%. This is what you get in that package you buy at the grocery store when you buy a Tyson chicken. If you pick up the cellophane wrap package and hold it up to your nose, even through the cellophane, it has an unwholesome smell. Before Acres USA was started, chickens had been taken off the farm and put into great big houses, crowded, constantly fed antibiotics, coccidiostats, and each other. The ones that die before they can be taken to slaughter after 40 days are ground up and fed back to the next generation, as is the case with cats and dogs harvested off of metro streets and cows that didn't make it in the feedlot, fed to the next generation. That's still going on with chickens and hogs, although ostensibly it's been nighed to the feedlot feeder. It's these unwholesome, almost repugnant practices that have brought our health profile to one of the lower ones in the civilized world. We were once 4th or 3rd or something like that at the time of World War II. We've sunk down to something like 26th at this time. Nor has this program been denied the cow-calf operator. He is constantly being assaulted by programs to take the cow-calves away from the independent farmer, put them into massive production programs, has to send, in the most cases, has to sell his red meat to the feedlot, where it's assaulted with high carbohydrates, develops acidosis to the point where E. coli is ever present, migrates through the rest of the red meat, and requires the restaurants to cook every hamburger half to death so it's totally tasteless, because that is the contaminant that flows with the system. And every once in a while the government will issue a recall. We're going to recall X number of tons of hamburger by such and such a provider. What they don't tell you is that recall is not the same as reclaim. Because by the time the recall goes out, most of that hamburger has been cooked to death and sold to people at Wendy's and McDonald's and every place else. And standing off in the wings are our small producers who are starting to market direct to the consumers. The venue is grass. Grass-fed is the coming thing. The cows that are genetically disposed to live off grass will do much better than the ones that are simply returned to grass. But that'll have to work itself out over the same period of time it took to get into the impasse we're in. The truth of the matter is there should be a slaughtering operation in every county in the United States, not one IBP. Right now, IBP, Tyson, ConAgra, and one or two others, Cargill, they keep combining until one will end up with it all. Back in Theodore Roosevelt's day, if 20% of an industry was concentrated, it was marked for antitrust intervention. Here we have a red meat industry with 80% in the hands of a single operator, and the Justice Department says times have changed, the antitrust laws should no longer prevail. I've talked to maybe 350, 400 different people, interviewing them in Acres U.S.A. in the last 35 years. I'm sorry to tell you that probably 30% of those people have departed the scene. We wouldn't know what they knew if we hadn't taken the trouble to write it down. When Acres U.S.A. was started, there was the Natural Foods Association, which has now closed down and left its work to succeeding organizations. And that was just about it for the United States. They only had 3 or 4 chapters. Today, there are organizations in every state in the Union, usually not just one, but several. There are at least one meeting, maybe not this big, but approaching this, all over the country. I would venture to say that practically every state has 1 or 2 every year. 35 years ago, there wasn't a college in the United States that had coursework in organiculture. Today, there are about 24 universities that teach the very subject we're talking about, or attempt to teach various coursework in it. Like up in Ohio, a young professor that I interviewed for Acres U.S.A. took the initiative to put in a pastures course to teach people how to manage pasture. Everybody was against him when he started, and now it's one of the best attended classes there is. Because the coming thing is going to be cattle on grass. And as I mentioned earlier, the better they are genetically disposed to live on grass, the more back fat they'll have, the better will taste the steak. But even the worst case scenario will be several league steps up from what's happening in the feedlot. Sally Fallon was honored tonight. She's one of the best things that's happened to ecoagriculture in these many years, because she's taking this whole message to the consumer. And the organo movement is being consumer driven right now for the first time. It's the consumer that will get off his swivel chair on Saturday morning and go find himself a gallon of whole milk. It's the consumer who will make an extra trip to pick up a turkey that's grown properly, or chickens that are range fed. It's this consumer that will make the whole thing we were talking about real. 35 years ago, after publishing the first issue of Acres U.S.A., I went out to talk to the Jackson County Fruit Growers Association. Now, you think you run into some hostility today. I thought they were going to throw me out of the place and skate me down the gravel road on my naked shoulder blades. You didn't dare mention the word organic. They were not in a mood to listen. Farmers, even the hard-shelled farmers, are in a mood to listen because they now know what a fraud LD50 is. Lethal dose. LD50 means the lethal dose that will kill 50% of the test animals. Such and such a amount of poison against such and such a body weight will kill 50%, and if it only kills 50%, then if you use as directed, it's safe. That's the government's position. If you take mercury, LD1, the lethal dose that'll only kill 1, not 50%, 1% of the test animals, and combine it with LD1 for lead, and you combine those two LD1s, you know what you have? LD100. Who in God's name knows what these various poisons in combination are doing? They can't possibly know. I've argued over the years that fluoride in the drinking water makes a combination out of everything in the medicine cabinet. And no one has an answer. They don't even have an answer because they've never asked the question. Why has this gone as slow as it has? One of the problems I've detected is that farmers quite frequently have the outlook of a Russian peasant. I'm going to do something I didn't care to do, but I've been asked to a number of times. I was asked to retell a story that I told about 3 years ago. Now, how many people are here for the first time? Quite a few. If the rest of you will tolerate it, I'll go ahead. This is the little story out of Russia. And it kind of reminds me of a lot of our farmers in the United States who have the soul of a Russian peasant. That's why they're so difficult to bring across and to abandon this low common denominator agriculture that seems to mistake efficiency for quality. God came to Ivan and said, Ivan, you're the salt of the earth. You feed the people. You bring in the crops. I wish to reward you. I wish to give you any choice you wish to make. You want to be rich? I'll make you a millionaire. I'll give you more rubles than you can spend. You want a better crop so you can tell other people? I'll give you double the crops, triple, whatever you want. If you want more land, I'll give you more land. But Ivan, know this. Whatever happens to you happens double to your neighbor, Vladimir. Well, Ivan went home and he started to think that that scoundrel Vladimir would have double what I get. I don't know if I can deal with that. And he said, I would like to have more land. Same scenario. How could I explain this to the boys when we're drinking vodka? And of crop? Yes, I would like to have my granaries overflowing. And he just couldn't. And finally, after tormenting himself with a sleepless night, he went back and he says, Vladimir would get double what I get? And he went back and he says, God, put out one of my eyes. We have a lot of people out there. That are worrying about their neighbor instead of worrying about their consumer and their customer. But they are coming to the party one at a time as they reason things out. More specifically, as they find, as Mr. Stolfus told me this morning, getting $10 for a gallon of milk, and people are standing in line to buy it. How do you do this thing? He makes yogurt, he gets twice as much for that. You can't start with 100 milking cows and do these things. You have to start small and build your business an inch at a time. But the consumer is ready. He's been ready for a long time, but now he knows it. And when he does that, we're on the way. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you giving me a few moments to welcome you. I just remind you that the function of a farmer is not necessarily to grow bins and bushels. It's to produce minds capable of thought and reason. And this takes quality food. My dad used to grow wheat, 18% protein wheat. Today, the average wheat producer has 9 or 7.5% protein wheat. He has chickens in the big chicken houses that have about 1,000% more fat than they did during the pre-concentration ways, fat going in the wrong direction. The omega-3 and omega-6 ratio is completely out of whack for the red meat production you get from the feedlot. These things can only be straightened out by moving into organic culture. We've endured 60 years of the dumbing down of agriculture. And the only answer to it is what we're doing in a convention, in a meeting such as this, in the publications that are available, in the books that are available. Now with that, I'll turn the meeting back to my son. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Acres U.S.A. podcast, a podcast production of Acres U.S.A. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres U.S.A. is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experience.